Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started now. Welcome to the field strategy presentation. So my name is Livy Taylor. I'm the driver for Citrus Circuits, and I'm also the chairman's lead.
Hi, my name is Justin. I am the strategy sub-team lead of Citrus Circuits.
Hello. So just to go over what we're going to be talking about in this presentation, it's sort of split into 4 sections. It's going to be defining goals. Oh shoot, I think it might be out of order. Okay, defining goals, match strategy, robot performance, and then driving ability. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. So hopefully you guys will have some questions. All right, so just to sort of go over the topic that we're going to be discussing, this presentation is called field strategy. And what we're sort of regarding field strategy as is the process that your team follows to ensure its best performance on the field, whether that be in your pit, before the competition, or during the match itself.
Glare.
Oh yeah, that's okay. I think none of them ever work. So yeah, just to be clear, this is our team's insight into how competition works and what works best for us. There's no one way to do it properly and to have a good time on the field, but this is just some of the things we've learned over the years of competing.
So to start it off with match strategy, this actually starts with your scouting data. You want to know what your alliance partners can do. So you want to gather data on scoring capabilities and locations. For example, not every robot can actually score on the 3rd level of the rocket, but they can score in other places. 973 did not need to do that this year, whereas other teams, they chose to. Driving ability is always important. How smooth can they drive? Consistency with that. How reliable is the robot? Does it break down? How often do they score out of how many attempts? Stuff like that is really important. But you also want to look at other things like your pit data. So with this, we collect a lot of things that are non-changing between the matches. So specifically, one of the most important things to me is the drivetrain. Is it tank? Is it swerve? Mechanism? Those different things will actually help you determine what roles that you want. Because, for example, tank drive isn't able to go sideways, but that also means that it's strong and push against being pushed in that direction. So when you're looking at your scouting data, make sure that you're looking at the upwards and downwards trends, because teams will, they may break down a little bit during a competition, but they also might be fixing something, and they might go and improve by a lot. So you want to look at that to figure out what they can actually do. When you go into the discussions of who does what, you want to discuss with all the teams present. This isn't always the easiest thing, as everyone has a lot of stuff to do at the competitions, but it's best to try and do it if possible, or if not, try talking to them separately, but then confirming each one and then reviewing on the field right before the match. You're going to want to discuss the capabilities of each member of the alliance to figure out what everyone can do along with the scouting data, but you will also want to actually discuss what the opponents can do. You want to predict what they can do and what you can do to counter them and figure out how you can optimize the difference between your points. So with this, you actually start with the auto routines. What can you do during the first 15 seconds of the match that will help your alliance the most? Is there something that'll help you? Is it consistent? Is it dangerous? Certain things like that. Then you go on to the teleoperated roles where you discuss who scores where, or if there's someone that you want to play defense for or on, and counter defense to protect. Make sure that when you're talking to your alliance partners, you're not just guiding the conversation to be, this is what we're going to do. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. You want to make sure that it's asking questions, being like, are you guys cool with doing this? Are you guys able to do this? So that this way, everyone gets a say in it, and you don't feel like you're just doing what someone else tells you. You actually have a say in what goes on.
Oh, and just sorry, one thing I wanted to add for that is something that's especially relevant this year is paying attention to what stations each member of the alliance is in, because especially for the center station, that really affects what you can do during the match. It's more difficult to play defense from certain stations. It's easier to play defense on the robot across from you, for example. So sometimes that informs whether, for example, we would score on the left rocket or the right rocket, because if the right rocket has the clearest line of sight for the robot that we were predicting is going to defend us, we probably want to score on the left rocket instead so that we avoid the defense and they have a harder time shutting us down.
So when you're also going through these roles during the actual match, think outside of the box. There are certain things that are allowed by the rules, but they're not specified by them. For example, every year for the past few years, there's been a climb time in the end game. This means that you have to get back to climb and make sure that you can get those points, because they can be the thing that makes the difference between a win and a loss. In 2017, if you could trap them or get them to touch you while you're touching the rope, that was worth a free climb, and that's similar to 2018 and this year. You can also prevent them from actually climbing, which is the same. It gives you the same difference in points. If you also think about it at the beginning of the season, you can look for chokehold strategies, or strategies that will make it so that you will have a guaranteed win. In 2015, if you had can grabbers and could grab 3 of the 4 cans, you guys could actually win a match no matter what the opponents did. And that's really crucial. The game could be decided within seconds, and you can know how well you can do. Make sure that you're actually watching other competitions for new strategies and figuring out what you can do to improve yours. So during the build or competition season, it's not just what can we do, it's what are other teams doing. That way you guys actually learn how are others thinking about the rules. Did they think of something I didn't? In 2017, we watched in the First and Michigan district, and we figured out that there was a strategy where you could try and block off other parts of the airship to try and score, and that actually helped us. In 2019, people saw that 1323 and 2056 had an auto where they would put 2 panels on the rocket and then pick up a cargo ball that rolls out. These are things that you wouldn't have maybe thought of, but you guys can implement later on.
Oh yeah, and one thing also for that is, especially if you don't have the manpower to be watching every single match that happens during the season, it's awesome because the members of Chief Delphi love discussing this type of stuff. There are always tons and tons of threads of people sharing their ideas. Like from the second the game comes out, people are sharing their ideas on what the best strategies may be. So absolutely, you don't have to be figuring out things yourselves. Our team has a motto: steal from the best, invent the rest, and you can absolutely apply that to these kind of scenarios. Wait, I thought you were doing this. Okay, well.
Oh, wait.
Let's go.
Oh, yeah.
You want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So next are match goals. What are you actually thinking about when you're going into the competition? So when you're thinking about it, think about both the match and the overall. Is 4RP possible? Are you able to get them all, or is it worth it to just consider getting the 2RP from the win and the 1 of the additional bonus RP? In 2019, it's a very apparent idea of going for 4RP by getting the rocket and the climb, or prioritizing cargo and the cargo ship, because that's worth more points for the same level of a task, or even easier. And that can actually get you more cargo or ranking points in the end if you aren't able to win a match. In 2017, it was the idea of, later on in the season, getting 4RP by getting the 4 rotors and the 40 KPA and the climb at the end of the game. Sometimes that could really make the difference, but you have to look at the capabilities of both alliances to figure that out. So along with the match strategies, you actually have to look at the competition as a overall. You need to analyze the match the match schedule as soon as you get it. Look for who are the strongest alliance partners, the most difficult matches against the hardest opponents, and figure out which ones you need to prioritize what. And you need to reach out to your partners within a reasonable amount of time, not too early, but not too late, to figure out what you want to do. So you also need to think about which role you're going to be. Are you going to be picking a team, or are you going to be trying to get picked in alliance selections? If your goal is to be in an alliance captain's position, you want to secure a high-ranking position, generally between 1 and 9. Although I believe until 11 or maybe even 12, you have a chance of becoming a alliance captain. You want to identify the potential partners. You want to make sure that you know who would fit well into your alliance strategy. It could be the strongest defender, or it could be the next highest scoring robot. So there are several different ways that you can figure out who you want to pick. You can figure out the most compatible robot in scoring. You can figure out the strongest opponent that you don't want to face, or you can figure out if you want to pick someone to prevent someone else from picking them, or because it's the perfect counter to another robot. Oftentimes, the best robot to pick is the one with the most similar capabilities to you. In the second pick, you actually want them to often perform a different task. It could be defense, it could be scoring in another location, or if you're in a say seeds 5 to 8, you may want something that complements you so that they can do another task, but they can also help you out if needed. If you are not in a picking position, you also want to make sure that you are showing off your skills to the potential captains as soon as possible so that you can actually seem like a promising pick. You want to display a good mix of your capabilities. In 2018, that would be scoring in the switch, scoring possibly on the scale, and especially scoring in the exchange. You want to show all of these things so that they know that you're capable of these things, not just, hey, I can do this, you might want to pick me. Saying it doesn't show it. You want to show your partners that you can do something. You can ask a high-level team actually what they want in a second pick so that you can demonstrate it. You can even say, hey, just to let you know, I took your feedback into consideration. We're going to try this out in our upcoming match. That way you guys can figure out what you want to do to show off and get picked as well as possible. When you're working in qualifications, make sure that you're actually talking to your partners and cooperating really well. If you're not very cooperative and you are insistent on a certain plan or don't want to do something, they may not want to pick you. They may see it as uncooperative and difficult to work with. So while it's important to express your opinions while creating a match strategy, it's also important to be flexible to the overall team's alliance's strategy. And as I said, you can always ask a team, what are they looking for in the second pick or first pick? And it's better to ask sooner than later. If you ask too late, you may not. They may have already created a pick list, or you may not have enough matches to show them.
Yeah, and just something I want to emphasize with that again is this kind of goes back to analyzing your match schedule, especially if you're looking to be picked. So it's good to identify which matches would be really suitable for us to show off our scoring capabilities and which matches are we going up against teams that we can show strong defense against. Because a lot of the time, especially in 2018, it was really clear a lot of second picks were chosen for their defense skills. But in quals, there's not really as much of a call for defense. So some teams didn't have a lot of chances to show off their defender skills, and a lot of potentially really good defenders went unpicked or picked pretty late just simply because no one knew they could defend really well. Awesome. So now we are going to move into the robot performance section. So of course, if your robot is dead on the field, you're not going to be doing anything really. So the first thing to understand when you're ensuring your robot's best performance is to just recognize that things can go wrong. Things will go wrong, and the best you can do is make sure that they go wrong as seldom as possible. So some of the things that we do to make sure that our robot is as functional as possible and at the lowest likelihood of breaking is to have a really strict pit process and systems check method. So in our pit, we always have a very set schedule. When we come back from a match, if something is broken, you fix it right away so you can test it right away, because the more you test in your pit and on the practice field, the more that they'll break on the practice field rather than in the middle of the match. We have a really clear list of things to systems check on our robot between every single match, and sometimes even twice between matches if we keep making changes to our robot. We do a systems check where we test every single capability of our robot. We press every single button. We check all of our cameras to make sure that nothing has come loose, nothing is broken, and if it has, so we have time to fix it and we're not, in queue trying to get on the field. Another thing that's really helpful to your robot performance and overall presence on the field is to have your drive team have clear roles for what each person is doing. When you're loading on and off the field, it gets pretty complicated with all the people flying around. And so what we've done is we tell each person, your job is to grab the driver station at the beginning and end of the match, plug it in, select all the autos, set up the cameras. Your jobs are to get the robot on the field, set it up in the right place, and your job is to get the cart in the right place. That way you're not spending a lot of time and mental energy telling people, wait, did you remember to grab the cart? Do you have an Ethernet cable? Did we set up the robot in the right place? Just so everyone knows their role and you can focus on more important things. Yes, practice field is bae. This is so true. We spend, especially in season, it's not as much of a priority in the off season, but in season, if we're not in our pit fixing something hurriedly, we are probably on the practice field or in line for the practice field, because the practice field is the closest thing you're gonna get to the real field experience and the best time you're gonna have of finding things to break on your robot so you can fix them and they don't break in the match. So whether it's testing your vision, running your autos, or just driving around a little bit, making sure you can pick up game elements in different configurations, you should be spending as much time as possible on the practice field. All right, driving ability. So this is let me see. The name of the game, practicing. For sure, pretty much all of your driver ability comes from how much time you put into practicing. Your skill that comes out, your skill in driving is what you get from practicing. Like there's no really like, the tips and tricks will help you, but nothing can replace just time on the sticks, driving in your shop, driving on the practice field, anytime you can get, going to demos, that kind of thing. However, once you're comfortable with like the basic operations of your robot, there are ways to think about your movement on the field to optimize your cycle time and to ensure that you're avoiding defense well, you're picking up game elements as quickly as possible, and you're just like always you're always scoring. You're never like running into walls or defenders. So the types of driving that occur in a game, there are sort of different things, and that affects the way you're moving the robot. So you could be moving for speed. This was pretty clear in the 2017 game where you're basically crossing the field as fast as you possibly can because the gears are so far away from the airship that your robot just needs to be fast. There's not a lot to it. If you're slow, you're just not going to have as many cycles. There's also sometimes where there's a lot of accuracy and placement required, and you can really see that in this year's game where the hatch panel strips, they're so small, you really need to be able to have the skill to accurately place your hatch panels or to have some kind of vision system to help you out, because that's what determines your cycle time. There's also defense in most games. Knowing how to play defense and what regions of the field to play defense on is really important so that you are not the one defender who's like sitting off in a corner of the field, like defending the cargo ship or something, and you're actually slowing down the team that is your target. All right, so this sort of takes us into what is enabling fast cycles. So like I said, it could be speed, it could be accuracy, it could be placement, but one of the really things that it's important, I'm actually going to skip down, is the path that you're taking when you're scoring your game pieces. So driving past is something that, sorry, I'm going to go back a slide, we really focused on, and it's especially clear in 2018 because all the like cubes and stuff and the loading stations and the scoring regions were placed in a very strange position. And especially because our robot could only score on one side of it, on the front side, we can only intake on the front side, and we can sort of score on the back side. It's really important to consider what direction your robot is facing. And so making sure that what Mike used to say to me is, if you're not, the only time your robot should not be in motion is when you're stopping to pick up a game element and when you're aligning to score it. Any other time than that, you should be moving. Your robot should never be stagnant on the field. So this really informed the direction that we took in our cycles between the pyramid and the scale. So you can see here are two like different paths that you could follow. But the thing is, one of them involves picking up the cube, then driving backwards to the scale, and then stopping once you're in the protected region of the scale to take your time to align. And one of them involves picking up the cube, backing up, stopping, and then you're facing forward while you're driving. But then the thing is, you have to align again once you get to the scale. So pretty much there's no sense in aligning your robot until you're right where you need to score it, because you don't know what you're going to hit on the way there. You might hit a robot. You might have to turn around for some reason. You only want to be stopping here and changing direction here and stopping here to change direction here. So this concept also can sometimes inform your robot design. So it's good to take a look at the field and see where things are laid out. In 2019, for example, the layout of the field really informed the design of the pass-through on our robot. We recognize that because the rocket and the loading station are so close to each other, that you'd be spending a lot of time turning around if you could only score on one side of the robot. And that's why we decided to go through all the iteration that was required for a pass-through. So your robot doesn't have to take time to turn around. It's just moving back and forth between the rocket and the loading station continuously. To go back to here, one thing that's also really important is how to get around defense. It's pretty hard to practice against defense because the best defense usually comes during matches, and so there's not a lot to replicate how to do that. But what I've found really helps me to play against defense is, again, never stop, because when you stop, you're giving the defender time to get in the way of you. Basically, all the defender ever tries to do is get in your way. So when you stop, you're like showing some indication of where you're planning to go, and then they can get in your way. So whether that means waiting in a protected zone to move away, or just basically gunning it and trying to swerve around them as fast as possible, you basically don't ever want to be sitting next to the defender because it's just so difficult to move around them, unless you're a swerve robot. But not everyone is, unfortunately. Yeah. What also, ramming is pretty effective in some cases, but that also there's a lot of influence on whether your robot has the ability to push other robots out of the way. If you have like a tank drive or a really powerful drivetrain, and whether they have a really powerful drivetrain. So sometimes you see us like when we're trying to score on the rocket, we're just like gunning it into the defender because we can usually like smack them out of the way of where they're sitting in front of the cargo ship. But sometimes they're like, they got pneumatic wheels, they got Neos, they're not gonna move. So you have to realize sometimes the best way to get around defense is to just not even play into it. Like they're parked in front of the rocket, and you have to understand maybe this means losing the rocket for this match, but we might lose the entire match if we keep trying to like run into their bumpers to try to get the rocket, and we'll score more points if we just go to the cargo ship instead. So especially if it's pretty close to get the rocket, it's a difficult decision to make, but it's important to know that when you're running into their bumpers, you're not scoring any points regardless. So you need to do something. So that just, I guess, that does give some indications of how it is to play good defense. To play good defense, the best defenders find where like the most obstructive place to place themselves, and they sit there the whole time. So sitting in front of the rocket, if you are able to not be moved away from the rocket, I mean, it's kind of boring, but it works. If you just park in front of the cargo slots, there's not a lot that people can do if they can't move you. But also something that really helps if the person you're playing against is really mobile and they're easily like just flying around on all sorts of the place, is to sort of have more mobile defense to just get in their way, because you don't need to stop them, you just need to slow them down, because the more you slow them down, the fewer points they're going to score. And there was one thing else I was going to say. What? Vision?
Yeah.
What about vision? Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, well, I'll skip to the bottom one. Don't rely on vision. We do have a vision system for like scoring hatches on the rocket ship, but when the robot's running into you, the vision gets interrupted and you can't really start it back up. At least in our case, you can't start it back up unless you have plenty of room. So you need to make sure you're practicing with your broken vision system, which we had plenty of time to do. But you want to be sure that you're practicing without your vision system if you have one, especially in games where accuracy and placement are super key. Yes.
Oh, just one more thing. If you are playing defense, one thing to watch out for is the refs. If you're watching the refs, you guys can watch for how long they're counting your pinning, your motions, to make sure that you don't get fouls. That is one of the biggest determining factors for if you're a good defense robot. If you guys can watch for fouls and make sure that you don't get any while playing as effective and strong of defense, it really shows your capabilities as a defensive robot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that can also go back to your match roles for the drive team. A lot of the time, if you're a defending robot, your human player is not going to be one of the people in the loading station. So we sometimes have the spare human player being the one watching the refs, because the refs are going to be calling it, but when you're on the sticks and driving your robot, you're not going to be looking at the refs, you're looking at your robot. So having your spare human player watch out for pinning calls or other fouls that the refs are calling is really useful, so that information can spread to the rest of the team. Do we have another slide? Okay, that's really awkward. Do you guys have any questions? Yes.
You said earlier that you should pick someone who has different capabilities than you. So like I'm thinking like if you're like someone who makes cargo ship, you should also pick robots who can cargo ship too.
Not necessarily. So if you're, oftentimes they do line up with the same capabilities, but it's more about what goes well with your aligned strategy. So for our aligned strategy, a lot of the time we have two great rocket robots that can score on the rocket, but while they're getting defended on, they score on the cargo ship. So that allows it to have that flexibility for us. It gives us so many scoring options that it's really hard to pin us down and prevent us from scoring, because if they stop one of us, we can continue to score. It's like having two of us on the field. But for other alliances, if you're a cargo bot, maybe you want to have another cargo bot. Maybe you want to have someone who can score on the rocket and the cargo ship, so that you guys can get more than just the 6 slots to score on.
Yeah, and also another thing to note for that is like in a game where it's like maybe 2 scorers and 1 defenders, when you're in a high picking position, you want to be going straight for the other good scorers, because otherwise by the time the draft gets back to you, all the good scorers are going to be gone. So you really want to prioritize the robots that are at the highest level. And ideally, if you're in a picking position, you're also a really well-performing robot. So you want a robot that can complement that. I saw there was someone else.
Uh,
What are you looking for in a second pick robot?
That's a great question. So this year, what we always told people was we love to see how they play defense, because finding the right defender is really what makes the difference in elims. If you can score fast, it's pretty easy to tell, but finding a good defender when all you have to watch are qualification matches is really difficult. And if no one is ever playing defense in qualification matches, which was especially common in earlier regionals before people realized like the value of defense, we were really looking out for the best defenders, and that was sort of our ideal like second pick material.
So this does change every year, but this year it was heavily reliant on defense, driving ability, cooperation, and reliability of the robot. We did also take into consideration autos, starting positions, climbing if you could climb onto level 1 or 2, or even 3 if we broke down, and the reliability of the robot, how consistent you were, and in cases where we planned to have a triple climb, we had a certain set of team members actually go around and test every single person or every single robot in the pits to make sure that they could climb with us.
Yeah, and so just to give you some more examples, like in 2017, climbs were so important because they were worth, way too many points. That was something that pretty much every second pick had to do, or you're losing out on what is basically 50 free points. So simple tasks like those that like no robot can go without are definitely something that every second pick hopefully will want to have if it's like worth the same amount. And also I really want to stress Justin's point about reliability, because if we see robots dying in quals a lot, that doesn't signal good times ahead in eliminations. So we really want to see that the robot is capable of always moving on the field. That usually means they can either play defense or probably score something. And they also are not losing communications a lot, because when you have sketchy comms, they're always going to be sketchy. That's how it feels sometimes.
Do you have any advice for taking advantage of circumstances? Because I know occasionally you end up with teams that are not necessarily the strongest team in general, but through luck and or just decent scoring, they end up much higher than you'd expect
I see.
at the end of calls. Do you have any advice for how to
Yeah, so
Oh,
do you want to say?
So one of the first things that comes to mind is when there's a team that is extra elevated in comparison to the other teams in the rankings, there's a process often known as scorching. So this is where, and this actually will happen naturally. You are looking at who you want to pick and who would complement you the most. But oftentimes, if they don't think that you are as strong as your ranking would say, or they think they could form a stronger alliance, they will decline you. But that's also preventing them from picking other top or being picked by other top teams.
Yeah, so then actually that what you're referring to happened to us in
2013.
champs like this year. But basically the way we handled it that way is it's important to communicate with the teams that are like interested in picking you and are looking like when they're ranked above you. It's important to communicate, like usually they will talk to each other like, hey, we were thinking of picking you, like would you be interested in alliance, that kind of thing. But at least in some cases, especially if a team maybe has a really lucky match schedule and you have maybe an unlucky one, it's important to know if you're planning to decline them, you should probably let them know in advance, just so they also have time to prepare some other choices, and also so that you're on the same page. Because sometimes if you do let people know that you're declining them, they may choose not to pick you, although it really varies depending on their interests. But then also when you're in that position where someone is above you and you may have to decline them, you need to start considering like alternate strategies, because it may be that you're not going to get one of the top scorers who is ranked really high. So you need to look for maybe like hidden gems. That is sort of what we struck upon this year. But you definitely need to make a pretty thorough pick list and also consider how your alliance structure will change if you are declining.
Can you explain scorching one more time?
So scorching is where there's a elevated team or a team that not many people know about, and they are higher than the other teams that are actually oftentimes stronger than them. So what they do is they offer partnership in the alliance selections, but the other teams turn them down. So when that happens, as you guys know, that team may not be picked by another team anymore. So if you're doing this one by one to each of the captains, you are actually preventing those potential captains from pairing up together. And while the competition will definitely be more interesting because the best robots are now dispersed, it's actually a lot harder for them because they also have to face against each other now. So the prime example for this was 2013 with us. We requested 4 teams and we were rejected by all 4 of them. And then we actually requested 148, who was not within the top 8 at that point, and they could not say no unless they wanted to not play in eliminations. So because of that, they had to say yes to us, and then we moved on to Einstein.
Yeah, so because in 2013, we ended up with a really lucky match schedule, and also there wasn't bonus RP, which only made it worse. We ended up in the first ranking spot, and because when we asked the other teams to become partners with us and they rejected, they couldn't pick each other. And usually if rankings happen in a different way, it'll be like 1 and 2 with versus 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, and et cetera, et cetera. But when they're all dispersed out, it makes it easier for, it would make it easier for us because we're only facing up against one like powerhouse team at a time rather than 2 of them together. So yeah, it's somewhat uncommon, but it's very disastrous
Yeah.
when it does happen.
About when is the right time to reach out to other teams?
I would say middle of the first day of competition. So at champs, it could be anywhere from the end of the first day to beginning of the second day. But at a normal competition like today, I would like you guys, if I were the strategist in planning out all the pick list stuff, I would really appreciate it if people reached out to me by, say, 3 o'clock, because that gives me time to watch their matches today and tomorrow, while I also already have some info on them. You could ask earlier, never hurts, but it's best to ask earlier than later. Don't be afraid of it. It will, at the very minimum, get your name to be like known and will pay attention to you.
Yeah, so usually at the start of the competition, everyone's sort of like running around getting their robot back together. After the first few matches have happened, everyone has a chance to see like what everyone else is playing like, and we've hopefully fixed our robot by then. And so we have a better idea of like what our scouting data is looking like, what kind of teams are standing out to us and what their characteristics are, so we can share those with other people. Does anyone have a question? Yeah.
How do you change strategy between qualifying and playoff matches?
So I will use an example for this one, but actually I won't use an example. In qualifiers, your goal is to get RP, and in elimination, your goal is only to win. There's no point in RP. So in this year's game, at least, it was pretty clear how your strategy would change that, because for the cargo ship, you're getting more points per game object than you are on the rocket, and it's easier to score on. But in quals, you need the rocket to earn RP. So our qualification matches usually centers around we get the rocket and hopefully that will earn us the win. We get the climb at the end. Whereas in elimination matches, it's pretty much fill up some of the rocket, but definitely get all of the cargo ship because you want the most points, not the most RP. And then sometimes that also changes your end game strategy. So for us, at least, we are much more likely to attempt a triple climb in elims because it'll earn you so many points. But in quals, it's not as useful because you don't need a triple climb to earn your ranking point.
Likewise, also, there are 2 other things that are different about elims. One, oftentimes it's a different set of robots that you're facing. It could be 2 really strong robots and a really good defense robot. And that means that you have to change it to fit these robots. How do you prevent them from getting points in a capped game like this where there's only so many items you can score? So that really affects it, because it's not just how many points can you score, it's how many points can you take away from them. And that strategy may change a lot. Another thing is the changing of rules between elims and qualifications. So in 2018, there wasn't that much of a change in rules. It was just the change in robots that really pushed the change in strategy. But in 2017, there were 2 things that changed. If you got all 40 KPA, I believe it was a 20 point bonus. And if you got all 4 rotors, it was a 100-point bonus instead of those RPs. So you could figure out, maybe I just want to get the 40 KPA, get that bonus 20, and then focus on getting that extra 100 points. Or you could say, well, I'm a pretty accurate and fast shooter. I could actually get more than the 100 KPA, or sorry, 100 points by doing KPA. So it's all about figuring out which one will get you more points based on the changes of rules in robots.
What are the factors that you take into consideration for your drive?
Okay, so our drive team selection process is not a tryout process or an election process. The way we do it, and this is by no means the best way of doing it or the worst way of doing it. What we have is our drive coach, Mike Corsetto, pretty much chooses the drive team and invites them to be on the drive team. And so the reason for that is we've found that when it comes to the drive team, what we're looking for is not necessarily skill, because skill comes with practice. The more you practice, the better you'll be, regardless of how good you were when you first tried it. What we're looking for is dedication and commitment, because usually our drivers are in it for the long run. I'm in it for the long run. And so if you need to make sure your student is someone who's willing to show up to the extra meetings to practice driving the robot, someone who's not, about to quit the team for some crazy reason, and also is someone that has been judged to works well with other people. I mean, of course, that really has to happen regardless, but we do not have a tryout process or election process, because we believe that any skill you have on the sticks can be accumulated with practice, and there's nothing that practice won't fix, really. Does that make sense?
Yes, basically you just have your mentors.
Mm-hmm.
In total, about how many hours would you take practice?
If we were talking to Mike, we would say hundreds and hundreds. In actuality, I would say between regionals, well, I would say before our first regional, it's probably close to 20 or 30 hours ideally. Between regionals, it's sometimes a little less, especially depending on if we have a vision system, maybe you can get away with a little bit less practice. But you're practicing a lot before your first regional because you're not comfortable with the new robot. And then between regionals, you're continually working on your skills to smooth out your paths. So I'd say 10 hours between each regional. And especially before champs, we try to do an extra little push. We might go up to 20 hours. I guess hours is one way of measuring it. What Mike tried to make us do was fill 100 rockets between our last regional and championship, which we didn't accomplish. But it's good. It's just important that you set goals for yourself and that you have a student who's willing to put in extra time, because the great majority of our driver practice occurs during extra meetings, not full team meetings, just because our shop is so full. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there specific things you have your drive team do for practice? Like what you said, fill up the rockets or how much time? What will happen for your drive practice?
There's practicing driving, and there's also learning to drive. So when I was first learning to drive, I didn't start by scoring hatch panels and gears or anything. I started with just getting familiar with how much pushing the sticks is going to make the robot move, how much turning the wheel is going to make the robot move. And so I started by doing figure eights around trash cans, that kind of thing, speeding up, slowing down, not tipping over while you're turning, very helpful. And then when it came to, once I was comfortable with moving the robot around at all, then I started practicing with the actual functions in the game. So in a normal session of driver practice, once we were reaching the end of the season, it was pretty much we just ran a full practice match. So we started on level 1 with our rocket. Maybe we ran an auto. Maybe we held a jacket in front of our eyes and did a fake sandstorm. We did that sometimes. But we would just run for 2 minutes and 30 seconds to see what we could expect to do in a match situation. So we just wanted to mimic a match as best as possible.
Do you suggest higher sensitivity?
I'm not sure
Sorry.
I'm not sure. I think it really depends on, do you mean sensitivity on the controls?
Yeah.
It depends on your driver, but I think it's better to err on the side of lower sensitivity, because the higher your sensitivity gets, the more jerky your robot will be, and the more difficult it is to perform the smooth turns and accelerations and decelerations that you need to keep full control of your robot. So especially if you're driving on an Xbox controller, lower sensitivity is good. I've seen some teams use joystick extenders so they can move a joystick a smaller amount. But I think it's better to have a slightly lower sensitivity, so you're not the robot, you flick the joystick and the robot's yeah. Anyone else?
Why would you say that defense was so important this year?
So in a game where there is a set amount of items that you can score in a set amount of places, there's a definite max score in a clean game, but winning isn't about getting the most points. Winning is about getting the difference in points. So think of defense as not just like getting in the way of your opponents, but taking away those points. That's like gaining points for yourself, in other words. So if you have a defense bot that can take away, say, 3 cycles, if that's 3 cargo, that's 9 points that you just got yourself. It also, in this game, if you look at the field layout, it's pretty packed. It's hard to get 3 robots on one side of the field. If they send a defender over, you only want 3 robots on your side unless you have a really good counter defense robot. If they don't send a defense robot over, great. Unclutter your side of the field, send a defense bot over, and have them wreak havoc on the opponent's side of the field while you guys have an empty field for yourself to score on. It's like practicing at your house, pretty much, or wherever you guys work.
Yeah, so just the reason I think that defense was so prevalent in 2019 was, first of all, because they made some rules about it and everyone's like, I wonder why they did that. And just because the side of the area of the field that you're scoring on in 2019 is so much smaller compared to those in games where there was not as much defense. Like 2017, there was nearly no defense, because in order for a defender to cause damage, they just basically need to be in the way. And it's much easier to be in the way in a small space. For practicing defense, if you have 2 robots, I think it's what we would sometimes do is have one robot practice scoring while the other robot practices defense on them at the same time, just so you're pretty much both practicing valuable skills. Beyond that, pretty much in matches is really the only great time to do it. Some teams do hold like scrimmages where they like gather a bunch of robots on whoever has the largest practice field, and they run some practice matches like that, so you can get in contact with teams in your area. But pretty much just doing it in matches is definitely the best way. And if you're starting out, one thing I see defenders sometimes doing is they sort of get distracted by other robots and they start chasing off some other robot, and instead of defending one robot the whole time, they're sort of like bouncing between them and not accomplishing much. So if even like parking somewhere is pretty good defense if you choose the right place to park, and then you can move scale it up from there to try and start like blocking them and moving to get in their way.
Would it be a good strategy to defend, so if you have a defense robot on your alliance, to have those have your defense bot kind of block their defense bot?
Yes, so that's actually called counter defense, when you play defense on their defense bot. So you're giving yourself extra space. You're keeping that defense bot from interfering with your robot. It's really hard to do, but if you can pull it off, it's a really good skill to have.
Do you think Neos, as they're usual, do you think those will affect the efficacy of defense?
Yeah,
Because they allow for fast robots to also have more pushing power.
yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
So actually, one of the data points we added to our scouting system this year was the drivetrain motor type. And we actually went around in the pits and asked every team, or we would just look at the robot if they weren't there, what type of motor do you guys have? How many do you have? And from that, when we looked at that on our pickless night, we figured out how much pushing power do you guys potentially have? And that really helped us.
Yeah, especially when it comes to the type of defense where someone parks and you need to ram them or shove them out of the way. Pushing battles, as we call them, and the type of motor involved on each side of the robot is really important, because pretty much if you have 2 mini sims and your opponent's got 4 Neos on each side, you're not going anywhere. Sorry, but yeah, I think Neos will definitely change the name of the game, especially because of some of the other features they have. If you saw that pros and cons of Neo motors, I'm sure they went over a lot of that. But I think Neos are definitely going to change the way defense is played.
So for me, it's right after this meeting. Normally it's or after this presentation, but normally we have it after the first day of quals. Instead of just going out to eat with our team, the Pickless team will get together, we'll grab our dinner, and we'll head somewhere else to eat while using a projector to display our data on a spreadsheet. And we just start going through that. It'll take somewhere between 30 minutes and 2+ hours, especially 2+ hours at Champs. But at Champs, we actually started this year having 2 Pickless meetings. one the night beforehand to create a rough list to look at, and then the second one after the second day of quals, where if we're in the first seed position, we just invite another team in. We're like, hey, want to just go through this, and it takes less time. And if we're not, we just modify it and then see maybe we can call someone up if we figure out how the pickings will go.
Yeah, like the structure of champs changes it a little bit because there are 2 full days of quals. But for regionals, generally, pretty much our full pick list is done after the first day of quals, and only minor changes will happen on the morning of the second day because there's not a lot of wiggle room for there really because it's pretty much like quals end and then you're picking, so you don't have a lot of room for last minute.
Tomorrow in the stands, we'll actually be having a few people analyze the pick list that we create tonight, and after each match or after several matches, they will evaluate each of the robots they've seen, and they'll be moving them around on that based on how they played.
So I'm pretty sure you guys are the team that makes like the strategy quiz after they release the game. You guys
Yes.
do the quiz. How do you guys make that?
So we have like a group of people who pretty much the second they release the password for the game manual, they put it in, they read the entire game manual, and it's their job to make the rules quiz while everyone else is like reading over the game manual, like asking questions about it, clarifying. It's pretty much a matter of those few people reading the game manual as fast as possible and making a quiz for it. And also one thing that we've used is there are certain sections of the game manual that don't change very much between years and are also not very relevant to game strategy, like the robot rules, like other than like dimensions and that kind of thing, like your pneumatics rules, like your crimping, like electronics rules, those kind of things. Those aren't really relevant, but the game rules, the point rules, the scoring values, those are what are really important for all of our team to understand.
All right, so as you said, you're lead strategist, right?
Strategy sub-team lead. There's actually a difference on our team.
So are you also the drive coach? And if not, like what criteria do you guys have for drive coach?
Drive coach is our lead technical mentor, Mike.
Yeah, Mike is always our drive coach, and so he's always in communication with the strategist and the strategy sub-team lead, but he's the one who's always on the field. So what will happen is our strategist will be the one conferring with other teams to figure out the match strategy, and then they'll hand our whiteboard to Mike. Mike will read it, and then we'll play it. Any other questions?
Is there a hierarchy to your drive team? So like the coaches always listen to and they have the final say on everything? Or are drivers and gunners kind of left about their own say on certain decisions?
I think it depends. I think usually we try to follow the match strategy that we've laid out just because usually it's the best course of action, but everyone is like free to put it like send in their own opinion. And we're also really flexible if we need to like adjust the match strategy mid-match. So it's never really set in stone or like listen to this person or die. I don't know.
Use a legitimate strategy to have the guy doing better.
Sorry?
Have the person controlling the driving it, the robot is controlling the
So driver and operator, same person?
Oh, so I think that really depends on how many functions your robot has. Because our robot, like there are all sorts of things that the robot needs to do. Having a separate driver and operator, we call it an operator, it was useful for us just because the driver is already focusing on so many things like driving around defense, getting to the right place, and the operator is the one who can focus on that. But there are also some games where, like in 2017, there's not really a whole lot that you need to do. Like you need to pick up a gear, you need to score a gear, and you need to hit the climb button at the end. So you could definitely get away with one person. And just one thing I'll add to that, I know it's kind of unrelated, but it's definitely, you can have a choice between having one person be your driver for the whole time or having 2 different people like take turns driving. It's totally up to you, but we found that just having one driver, and we barely even have a backup driver just because we like spend as much time as possible like funneling all the practice time into the one driver, and hopefully they don't get sick. That's just the way we found works best.
Do you have any tips for optimizing cooperation between the driver and operator?
Between the driver and operator, what we try to do is we're on the same page at the beginning of the match. We spend a lot of time practicing just so we get used to like each other's reaction times. And we also try to keep up like, it's sort of fallen off a bit, but it's good to keep up like a constant dialogue during the match. Like we're saying to each other, okay, after this one, we're going to get the cargo and score it in the cargo ship. It's like, okay, remember that the middle one is full. All right, cool. After this, we should see if we need to climb or score another piece. And we're also talking with our human player at the same time. So like when you're driving, it's really easy to sort of like get sucked into it, but keeping like a constant stream of dialogue keeps you from getting like tunnel vision, and it also helps with your communication. So yeah, it's just practicing talking to each other.
So I heard you have a strategy sub-team. So are they involved in also with making your scouting map, or is that like solely programming?
So that is so within our actual team, strategy is a secondary sub-team, which means they are in another sub-team as well. So some of ours are in the software royally, how it's going to look, but I'm very excited for it.
Like when you're like at competitions, or like just in general. We found that mostly it's like someone from another team comes up to us while we're in our pit and says like, hey, where's your strategy person? Like, can we talk to them? That kind of thing. But I mean, over email would definitely work. It's just sometimes it might be like a delayed response. I think in person is probably the best way.
We also, sometimes the members of our pick list group or coaches will actually have phone numbers of each other and just call each other. Just to wrap it up, can we take 3 more questions?
Yes.
What scouting data do you guys prioritize most in forming the strategy?
So as we said this year, defense. We use that a lot. We use the pit data of like drivetrain, motor types, and like height to make sure and also pictures of each robot to make sure that we were picking one that could do defense. We also looked at reliability and scoring in autos, but one of the biggest things was our normalized driver ability and the defense ratings that we gave them.
How do you actually accurately describe how good the defense is? 'Cause that's harder to measure than how many cargo they scored or how many matches they played.
So this year we, right after our second competition and into our third competition, we redeveloped what we call our Super Scout app. So we had it so that our 2 stance strategists, 2 of our top strategists would be in the stands and they would analyze specifically robots that are doing defense. We would give them ratings on how well they're doing, and we would take into account each push battle and mark that in there for who won and by how much.
Yeah. So
That will be released soon.
yeah. So pretty much it's like a subjective choice between the people watching.
Do you think it would be smart in general to make an only defense bot where it can't do any of the scoring?
Like as that's like your team's robot.
Yeah, just a defense bot.
I think it depends how important defense is. Honestly, I can't really envision a scenario where it would be the ideal choice, especially because you probably at least want an end game, and you want to have some ability to score, because defense is taking away points from your opponents, but it's also not earning you any points. So there's no promise that you'll have, like if you got great defense, but you don't have the scoring to back it up, it still probably might not help you in the long run. So yeah, we can take like 1 more, and then, but Justin and I are going to be here for a while longer, and you can come up to us like now or tomorrow.
Well, I have the pick listing.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be here, and you can come and talk to either of us tomorrow. So is there a last one?
Yeah. How long does it take you the whole build for the scouting software team to spend the whole building on that app?
So the software scouting subteam, if you have listened to how we actually structure our build season, after the what's and the rules test section, the software scouting group will actually split off during the hows, and we will start developing our own scouting system with our own discussions. And that will go until probably about week 4 or 5, and that's when we start debugging, doing full system tests. And then from there, we just continue to add more features, update it with what we want, what we don't need, simplifying it to make it as easy to use for the users, and so on.
Yeah. Okay, so I can talk to you right after if you want. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming. If you have any last questions, you can contact us through our website or our email. I don't think this link works, unfortunately, but yeah, you can. Oh yeah, these are our emails if you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you all for coming. I hope you learned something. Yeah.